Hey everyone, Evan Dammarell here, co-host of Locked On Cavs. Before I lead you into Friday's show, just wanted to let you know that I am going solo with Locked On Knicks co-host Gavin Schall to check in and take the temperature of the Cleveland Cavaliers, the New York Knicks, and their likely collision course leading up to the Eastern Conference playoffs. Before we get into this show, though, I just want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now with FanDuel. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
All right, guys, as promised, it is a Locked On Knicks, Locked On Cavs crossover. I'm Gavin Schall alongside Evan Dammarell over with the Locked On Cavs podcast. Evan, really appreciate you taking the time to join me. We haven't gotten to see a lot of each other this year after a hard-fought playoff series. Knicks and Cavs played one back-to-back early in the year. Cleveland, if I'm remembering correctly, had Donovan Mitchell, was missing pretty much everyone else for those games. The Knicks are obviously a drastically different team since those matchups, so I thought it was a good time for a check-in, and I wanted to start off given that these teams were the two hottest in the NBA throughout the month of January into February for you guys. What's been the key to the Cavs' success? And I guess that's, I'm just gonna ask that question. 3, 2, 1. Given that these have been two of the hottest teams in the NBA since January, what has Cleveland kind of figured out over this extended stretch?
So it is interesting. I think they have figured out that clearly, this is kind of a no-duh. Donovan Mitchell is their best player overall. They did get back, they as in Cleveland, Evan Mobley and Darius Garland, who were both out due to respective surgeries. Mobley had knee surgery. Garland had surgery on a fractured jaw. They did come back a little bit into the new year, but like you said, the Cavs were one of the hottest teams in basketball heading into the All-Star break. They saw like an 8-9 game winning streak come to a close at the hands of the Philadelphia 76ers at home. Then they bounced back against the Chicago Bulls, and it was not like a terrible performance so far. Post All-Star break, it's a little up and down, but I think that's the case for most teams coming out of the All-Star break. But more than that, the key for success to them has just been one, Donovan Mitchell just really showing that he does have the bona fide chops as an all-NBA type player, at least on a local level, and him as in Mitchell included, both think like he should be in the MVP conversation just from how well he's been playing, and also just like the fact that the Cavs do have some strength in numbers. They did add Max Strus and George Niang over the summer, but you see guys like Sam Merrill, Craig Porter Jr., even Tristan Thompson before he was busted for PEDs step up during this hot streak. Which is a weird thing to say, just Tristan Thompson turning back the clock. Then you found out what he got busted for, and then it all makes sense why he turned back the clock. But regardless, it's been a collective effort. I think it's been a little bumpy just getting Garland and Mobley back into the swing of things, but it's an interesting thought. Just December 15th, you thought the Cavs season could have come to an end there. They lost 2 frustrating games in a row to Boston. They lose Garland and Mobley to injury for a month to 2 months at most. There's a lot of questions about this team, like what is the future with Donovan Mitchell? But, you also do sometimes don't see the forest for the trees and forget that they did have Jared Allen and Donovan Mitchell on this roster, but it's been a collective effort too. Like, it's not just like the Donovan Mitchell show, even though he's at the center of everything. That's been kind of fun. Like, there's nights like Isaac Okoro is the best player on the floor, or it's Sam Merrill who's just going unconscious from the perimeter, or it's Dean Wade or George Niang. Like, everybody has stood up and kind of just stepped up in a collective way for the Cavs, and that's kind of been the recipe for success. And bouncing it back to you, what has made, I know like the OG Anunoby trade was kind of a catalyst for New York, but in your opinion, like on top of maybe just the obvious for Cleveland fans, what has been such a catalyst for New York just becoming such a hot team lately?
Yeah, I think even if it is obvious, you undeniably have to start with Anunoby. The other day, I was looking up the Knicks top 2-man lineups like over the course of the year. And out of their top 8, all 8 of them had OG Anunoby in it. So it's been pretty clear that he has been a game changer for the Knicks, a team that like when faced with like elite size and length, just would get decimated this year and would look small in a way that was just extraordinarily demoralizing. Because it wasn't like there wasn't a clear-cut solution. It wasn't all right, play harder, shoot better, commit less turnovers. Like, all right, like we're just physically outmatched in a lot of these games, and Anunoby and in one fell swoop like changed that. And I think just moving off of RJ Barrett, who was like a pretty high volume field goal attempt guy and was not super efficient, like the ball just started moving much better. Obviously they improved defensively, like in wake of Mitchell Robinson's injury, they were far and away the worst defense in the NBA. They trade for OG. All of a sudden they're far and away the best defense in the NBA. Another key part of that was Isaiah Hartenstein stepping up, and his like at this point somewhat concerning lingering Achilles injury has definitely put a dent in that, as the Knicks, like after that long winning stretch where they went something like 15-2 over 17 games, like they lost 4 in a row heading to the All-Star break, pulled one out against the Sixers the other night as we're recording this on Saturday afternoon. But it just felt like, I mean, very similar to Cleveland, like every move the Knicks made worked out. Like Hartenstein has been, like, I would say just so much better than you could expect. Like impact metrics have him as like a top 8 center in basketball. Dante DiVincenzo has been just ridiculous. Like in the 5 games leading up to the All-Star break, he averaged right around 27 points per game, shooting 40% from 3 on high volume. And that wasn't something when the Knicks signed him for like $14 million a year. They could have reasonably thought was going to happen. Precious Achiuwa, who felt like a throw-in in the Anunoby trade, and someone that when the Knicks are fully healthy, maybe someone still when the Knicks are fully healthy, wasn't really going to play. He's ended up being one of the best offensive rebounders in basketball for this stretch. Great pick and roll combination with Jalen Brunson. And they've compensated for Julius Randle being out now by putting a little bit more shooting on the floor and opening up for Jalen Brunson to run spread pick and roll. And in my mind, Evan, because I can't say I've watched a ton of the Cavs this year, that's probably part of Cleveland's success. Like with Evan Mobley gone, being able to play 4 out and not having that same dilemma they had against the Knicks, where for long stretches they were starting 3 non-shooters or with like a semi-shooter and Isaac Okoro like on his best days. And I'm kind of curious, like if you're the Cavs now, like you get back your 2 stars and it's great, you're fully healthy. And I'm sure your fans are groaning right now because you guys have probably talked about this ad nauseum, but I'm curious about it. Like,
you're fine.
What is the balance there between having these stars back but also not losing what made this team, like, again, arguably the best in basketball for a month and a half?
So I think you're seeing a little bit of the growing pains right now with these guys being back. Granted, Donovan Mitchell's missed the last 2 games post All-Star break with a lingering illness. From what I've gathered as we've recording this, he is expected to play against the Washington Wizards on Sunday, but it's also the Wizards. You may not need Mitchell to beat them. But to your point, I think bringing these guys back into the fold was a fair question. It was my question heading into this because, like, you don't want to mess up a good thing. And also, like, the Cavs more or less changed their entire offensive identity and dichotomy after Garland and Mobley went down. Like, they became a lot more 3-point heavy. They became like a lot of like a spray and pray team. You said a lot of spread pick and roll. Like, I think that's just something you copy from Mitchell's time at the Jazz. Like, they found a ton of success doing that. So let's just turn that up to the like umpteenth degree and just really make that identity. And it really helps because, like, it gives Jared Allen spacing and an ability to operate down low. It also, you know, lets guys like Karis LeVert or Donovan Mitchell attack the basket, not just be reliantly attacking from the perimeter. I think Isaac Okoro finding his confidence in his shot helps too. But to answer your question, and like, it's something we talk about a bit, it's still a work in progress. Surprisingly, Evan Mobley kind of clicked right away. He came out very, very aggressive post injury. I think he just kind of showed in the first game back post the injury, and he said like he was surprised like how different it is conditioning wise being on the floor compared to like what the Cavs were doing to keep him in shape while he was rehabbing his knee. And he's like, yeah, I have to wait for my wind to get back underneath me. But we're starting to see a little bit of a very different Evan Mobley post injury too. Like, he is actually shooting the 3 ball a lot more. Post All-Star break, not so much right now, but like, he is reading and reacting to the defenses. He's kind of stepping up as the second or third option sometimes on the floor, depending on who he's sharing the floor with. And you're seeing like a lot of that confidence just kind of emerge from there. And that's been really just surprising after he kind of had a pretty flat start to his 3rd season. Everybody thought he was going to kind of have like a big, you know, proverbial leap. But Garland more so, it's been a bit of a work in progress. Like, it's just tougher because that was always going to be the issue when you pair Garland and Mitchell in the backcourt together, is like they both are most successful with the ball in their hands, and you're trying to figure out ways to balance that where they both have opportunities to run the offense as like the de facto ball handler with the other one playing off ball. I think Mitchell's more comfortable doing that just from, sharing the floor with Mike Conley in Utah, or also just doing it in Cleveland with Darius Garland. But Garland is showing clear signs of rust. We can talk more about his recovery in the upcoming segment, but it was much different than Mobley's. Like, he is a little bit behind the eight ball a little bit. And at this point in the season, you have to be a little patient with it, but he is learning how to play off ball, kind of being the guy who runs off ball, plays with screens, plays with motion, kind of uses cuts and things like that, just to kind of like get wide open shots on the perimeter, or uses his playmaking, or, just the fact that he's comfortable taking contact and drawing fouls and things like that to kind of get within the flow. But like, it's been of a bumpy progression. He's admitted like he doesn't fully feel comfortable quite yet in this new system the Cavs are trying to employ. So it's a bit of a work in progress, and I think it'll figure itself out. I mean, hopefully it does before the postseason begins, but that's just something worth keeping an eye on. It's just interesting though, because like Mobley, pretty easy transition. Actually has more so been surprising since coming back from injury, just because he's kind of a guy who's been a chameleon all of his NBA career. But Garland, it's still a little bit of a work in progress, and they still have about 20 plus games to kind of get him acclimated again before we kind of get rolling towards the postseason. Just the issue with that is you do have teams like New York, Milwaukee, I think Philadelphia, depending on what happens with Embiid as well, breathing down your neck for the 2 seed. And that does make things a little tight if you are trying to be mindful of like home court advantages in certain matchups come playoff time.
Yeah, and I think, to me, that's going to define Cleveland's season more than anything else. Like, can you maximize Garland and Mitchell simultaneously? And like, as much as it was like the lack of shooting for the Cavs and the Knicks' advantage, like in terms of physicality on the glass, like to me, the biggest reason Cleveland couldn't win that series was because like Garland and Mitchell, like it was a your turn, my turn thing, and like somewhat maybe a better version of it, but somewhat similar to what you see with Trae Young and DeJounte Murray in Atlanta, where like both guys are just ultimately better. Like the 10 minutes a game they get to run the offense themselves. And to me, obviously Garland is a better player than whoever you're going to, like, whether it's Strus or like whoever you have playing the 2 or the 1 when Mitchell is out there alone. But like, does it add up to as much as the sum of its parts? And I guess that kind of takes us into like a broader question. Like I could talk about it from a Knicks perspective first, but like going back to that playoff series, like this Cleveland team is clearly better. Like, I don't think there's any doubt about that. And just the ability to finish, like, I guess I don't know what their closing lineup is going to be. I would assume maybe Max Strus out there, but to finish with a guy who can defend and can shoot, but also like, unlike Karis LeVert, like doesn't need the ball in their hands. Like, it feels like Cleveland is getting closer to having clarity, like in terms of how they're going to finish games, how they're going to want to play. And maybe the injuries, for better or worse, threw a bit of a wrench in that. But like, how far along do you think they are in like kind of correcting some of the issues in terms of why they ultimately lost in the first round last year?
Today's episode of Locked On Cavs is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if you bet and your bet wins. You can bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA and the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. I think clarity is a great way to put it. When you're looking back to last postseason between the Knicks and the Cavs, it was clear that New York just had the legs that the Cavs did. And the Cavs maybe had 5.5, 6, depending on Isaac Okoro's offensive production, functional players in that series against New York. And even then, like Evan Mobley and Jared Allen were getting bullied down low by Mitchell Robinson, and then Isaiah Hartenstein. Josh Hart, too, is just, killing them with the offensive boards and crashing the glass. And then Jalen Brunson just kind of doing Jalen Brunson things, and then Tom Thibodeau having the right type of game plan to kind of dial up the pressure on Mitchell and Darius Garland and Evan Mobley and Jared Allen, who were having their first playoff series together, to beat them, and that was the right recipe for success. But looking back at that compared to now, the Cavs have added some depth. And when you talk about the closing lineups, I think the clarity will emerge now that this team is at least quote unquote fully healthy. Ty Jerome is out for God knows how long after having ankle surgery, but he hasn't played since the home opener back in October for the Cavs. So he's not really in the rotation or mix, but technically they're not fully healthy if you want to get technical about it. But either way, it's going to emerge, but I think JB Bickerstaff has found, especially during this stretch when they didn't have Mobley and Garland, is one, he showed his chops quite a bit. Like, I think he knows like the right pressure points, what guys have it, what guys don't. He is a firm believer in the hot hand belief where, like, if a guy is giving you something that you need, like a Sam Merrill, who is a guy who was a UDFA, was a part of the championship Bucks, was then traded to Sacramento, tore his ankle apart, was floated around in the G League and worked his way back up the ranks, and then was playing spot minutes. Ditto for Craig Porter Jr. Like, he was playing because Mitchell was hurt and Garland was at 100%, and then next thing you know, he's making winning plays against Joel Embiid in overtime. So I think that the fact that they lost two of their top players forced them to look at others, and now kind of gives them a good problem to have where you can ride with some of the hotter hands. So ideally, you're closing with both of Garland and Mitchell, one or both of Mobley and Allen, and then you filter in Karis LeVert, who I think can be helpful just as an extra ball handler and just kind of gives you an extra depth and dimension. Isaac Okoro, if you want to kind of just throw him at an opposing team's best perimeter player, like there's tangible data, and then you can just watch like with the eye test. Like, he really frustrated Damian Lillard in all 4 games the Bucks played the Cavs in. Like, Lillard wanted nothing to do with Isaac Okoro every time they're on the floor, but Bickerstaff just matched Lillard minute for minute with him. And then you have him, like Strus can finish it just because like he is a shooter, and also he has surprised a lot of Cavs fans with his ball handling ability. Even Sam Merrill or a guy like ideally George Niang isn't the dude you want just because of defense, but like Dean Wade could step up because like he doesn't give you the shooting Niang maybe does, but can give you that multi-positional defense. The Cavs have their pecking order set when it comes to their stars, but like they have guys that can rotate in, and Bickerstaff has just really coached his tail off all season long, especially like, with the wake of the injuries and the fact that they're so up and down to start the season, that they are kind of just in a nice spot where, like, versus last postseason when the Cavs collided with the Knicks, they maybe have more than just 5.5, 6 viable guys they could throw out in a series. And sure, the game gets slower, the pressure gets tighter. It's do or die, things like that. You go with 8-man rotations, and at least for the stretch of the season, now that this team is again quote unquote healthy, like you keep an eye on like, okay, who are the heavy minute getters? Like in terms of like 1 through 8, like those are probably going to be the dudes who are getting most of the minutes come playoff time. And also you can start to formulate like what the closing lineups are. But for now, clarity will start to emerge. Because like I said, that's a really good way to put it. Like clarity will emerge down the stretch as we get an idea of who's going to be playing come playoff time more often than not. Who does Bickerstaff kind of have the firm trust of in high pressure situations, and just kind of keep rocking and rolling from there. And from the Knicks side of things, like they gave up RJ Barrett in the Anunoby trade. They are a lot of different horses are not in this race anymore. Like I don't know if Mitchell Robinson will be back come playoff time, but like we talked about this before the show, even like we can talk about how these two teams feel like they're on a collision course again for the playoffs soon, but at least in your eyes, like how do the Knicks close games more often than not, though? Is it just kind of like the hot hand, or is there like a set like firm order? Because there's a lot of those Villanova guys on that team, and then OG Anunoby as well. So like how does Tom Thibodeau pick and choose like who closes certain games for New York?
Yeah, I mean, it's still an open question just because we haven't seen the full version of this team and might not get to see them until literally the last 5, 6, maybe 10 games of the regular season. Like OG Anunoby will ideally be back in early March, like sometime in the first half of March. Julius Randle, it's sort of a bigger question. Like all signs point to the fact that rehab is going quite well for him, but it's an awesome injury where you can never rule out a re-injury, and like even just depending on how he continues to progress, like you can't rule out the fact that like the second he takes contact, it'll become like abundantly clear that he's going to need surgery on and be out for the year. So obviously like he's far and away the Knicks' second most important. Well, I don't want to say that with OG Anunoby, but I would argue he's probably the Knicks' second most important player. Certainly their second most important guy on offense. And I don't know if the Knicks can even win a series without him, much less win 2 or 3, as some fans are hoping. So that's obviously a very big wrenching thing. And to your point, Mitchell Robinson, who I think probably will be back before the end of the regular season, but it's also not a sure thing. That being said, if everyone's healthy, I think in my mind, it's pretty clear that on most nights they should be closing with just what's going to be the regular starting lineup of Jalen Brunson, Dante DiVincenzo, OG Anunoby, Julius Randle, and I'm going to say Isaiah Hartenstein, almost regardless of how healthy Mitchell Robinson gets.
Love to hear it. As a Hartenstein truther during his time in Cleveland, the fact that he's thriving in New York is just music to my ears. I love me some Harten dimes out there. Just seeing his assist numbers and things like that, like just doing all of his Harten dime things. I'm like, my man still got it. It just, you know. I still like G League MVP doing MVP things. Today's episode of Locked On Cavs is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 3 million members. They're the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS, and it's just you against the numbers. You pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 players' stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks is really simple to play, and I can make my picks and submit my entry in less than 60 seconds. They offer quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and enormous selection of players and stat types are what makes Prize Picks, in my eyes, the #1 daily fantasy sports app. So if you're interested, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that is prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for the first deposit match up to $100.
I don't know if like it would be cool if someone did a story on this someday, but like halfway through last year, like he was disappointing enough that there was talk like, all right, could we just maybe trade him back to the Clippers? And like something like flipped, like it was like when like the guy in the movie Dodgeball just like loses his mind for like 4 minutes at a time. But it's like Hartenstein just turned on that rage mode like permanently, and he has just been just a monster since then. Like we're again one of the more impactful rim protectors, like borderline in basketball at this point, like an exceptional offensive rebounder, and just gives the Knicks a little bit more spacing on that side of the floor. There's going to be some room for Josh Hart to close some games. That was ultimately to the Knicks' detriment in the Heat series. He was much better against the Cavs, but the relative like not even like his inability to shoot, a little bit his inability to shoot, but more so his unwillingness to shoot, like just made it impossible. And the offense was dramatically better in that series when Quentin Grimes was on the floor, even though he was shooting like 25% from 3, just because he was a nominal threat. So that's kind of going to be the needle for Tom Thibodeau to thread. But it's funny, Cleveland is maybe the team most in the mix, like along with the Clippers for the Knicks in this conversation. But I'd argue the Knicks might be the deepest team in basketball. And it's really going to be on Tom Thibodeau, much like it sounds like JB Bickerstaff has done when this team is fully healthy, to just hit the right notes in the right games in the right series. And if the Knicks and the Cavs do ultimately end up meeting up, like I wonder if that means more Mitchell Robinson, like where he was like, there's a case to be made. He was probably their best player like in that series. And he certainly like created their identity in a way that is rare for a guy who is nominally a role player. So Tom Thibodeau has a lot to figure out. The Knicks are likely going to have to do it with very little time left in the season, but all the pieces are there to have a lot of success. And I guess because of those injuries, like I'm curious, and on Cleveland side of things, like healthy, but to your point, still figuring it all out. Like, what do you expect the success for them to be the rest of the regular season? Like, are you pretty confident they're going to hold on to the 2 seed with the Bucks flailing and the Knicks at less than 100%? Because it feels like once the Knicks have Anunoby back, I think they can be a very, very good team again and could maybe make a race at that. I think as of recording, 3 games in back of Cleveland right now.
I believe so.
But like, is there a chance like the Knicks or Bucks can make a run, or do you think Cleveland just continues to play how they've been playing and kind of closes it out and locks it up?
Well, the fact that they are sliding on a 2-game losing streak currently doesn't help this argument a bit, but my co-host Chris Manning and I talked about this quite a bit, but I'm of the stance, and I kind of remain of this stance, that the 2 seed is Cleveland's to lose at this point. They split the series with the Bucks 2-2. I think there's some convoluted mathematics where if they beat if they beat 2 of the Bulls, Pistons, or Pacers like if they win 2 of those 3 matchups, like they outright win the division, and that gives them the tiebreaker over Milwaukee in that sense. But I think it's theirs to lose. We'll obviously see like the Knicks and the Cavs do play each other, not the week of when we drop these episodes, but the following week. So that'll be an interesting matchup to kind of also like give us a little bit of a litmus test of like where these two teams are at. Even if New York isn't 100% health wise, or if Cleveland isn't 100% rotation wise, or just like, kind of ironing out some of the kinks as they kind of figure things out. But I think it's going to be a dogfight no matter what. I just think that is the nature of the beast. Like Boston has separated themselves enough just to kind of sit alone at 1, and it's going to be a bit of a nudging and jockeying between 2, 3, and 4. And again, maybe we'll see what Philadelphia does too, if Embiid comes back, or if Tyrese Maxey continues to play out of his mind a little bit. But it's going to be an interesting race. But I'm of the mindset that it is Cleveland's to lose, because I just kind of have faith in this team. I'm not really as concerned as I was maybe after last postseason. And sure, it's the regular season, it's a different beast, but for reference, they lose New Year's Day to the Toronto Raptors. They were still kind of up and down and kind of finding themselves a little bit. They're the 10 seed at that time. We're recording this towards the end of February, and they've climbed from 10 to 2, and they've been in the 2 spot for a couple weeks now. So I think it's theirs to lose. They could stumble a bit, maybe fall back to 3 or 4 for a hot second, then climb their way back up. But it will be a bit of a dog. Like, it's not going to be an easy defensive 2. Like, it's going to be a fight. And I do agree, like, when the Knicks get OG back, like, they could make a legitimate push and run at it, just because if I remember off the top of my head, I believe New York and Cleveland are either tied or very close to each other for their like remaining strength of schedule as of when we're recording this. So it just kind of depends on like, hey, some nights just may not be New York's night or Cleveland's night. And like that does have an effect in the grand scheme of Eastern Conference standings, but it's just going to be tight no matter what. Cause I'm looking at it right now as we record this on Saturday afternoon on February 24th. Cleveland is a game ahead of Milwaukee. They're 2.5 ahead of New York. Like it's tight no matter how you put it. And yeah, like we'll see. Like, but what are your thoughts? Like, do you think New York is going to make a real run for it, or do you think they're going to it's just going to be a lot of leapfrogging between just Milwaukee, Cleveland, and New York down this stretch?
Yeah. I think it's so tough to say just because it's so ambiguous when they're going to get Randall. Like if you told me they get OG back March 5th, Randall back somewhat close to 100% March 10th, I would say the Knicks have a pretty good shot, especially when you look at the Knicks like last like 12 or so games. They get the Pistons, the Raptors, the Spurs, the Nets, the Bulls 3 different times, a Boston team that may already be resting guys, the Nets a second time. Like it's not like the Knicks have some tough like the upcoming stretch for the Knicks is pretty tough. The next 5 games, which includes the Cavs, and then like back-to-back games against the Sixers, and then a West Coast swing. Like, but if the Knicks like get to like they have a Thursday, March 21st game at Denver, if after that game they have Randall and Anunoby and they're within like 2-3 games of Cleveland, like obviously if the Cavs win enough, like it'll just be a moot point. But I think the Knicks have a chance to finish on like a 12-2 run or something like that. So they just have to stay within striking distance. And I'm pretty confident they will. Like the way they look, their first game coming out of All-Star break was great. The single biggest X factor in that is, I would say, Isaiah Hartenstein's health. Like he was, as far as we knew, like he was going to be pretty close to 100% coming out of All-Star break. They did say they were going to manage his minutes, played like 7 minutes in the first half of that Sixers game, only had 1 rebound, and then didn't make much of an impact in the second. Like if he's not 100%, like the Knicks are just a different team as they lose that rebounding and defense advantage. And we've kind of danced around like directly previewing a matchup just because it seems so premature. But to me, like the one defining thing where like if Cleveland doesn't have this figured out, like even with more shooting, even with Donovan Mitchell like potentially being the best player on the floor, like it just won't matter. Like, are they more ready for the Knicks just from like a pure like strength and toughness and defensive rebounding perspective? Is more than anything else like where that series just ended was once the Knicks realized like, all right, like we can be competitive for essentially every single offensive rebounder. And that was with like a not as good version of Hartenstein. Granted, if Mitchell Robinson is less than 100%, that could change things. But presuming it's a second round matchup and not a first, like does Cleveland have an answer to that at the end of the day?
So the offensive rebounding thing is interesting just because Cleveland didn't do much to address that in the offseason. They really leaned on the fact that Jared Allen put in work over the summer, got bigger, stronger. I think Evan Mobley bulked up quite a bit comparatively to last season, and he is showcased that he's able to handle some of the physicality. I think a lot of it is a collective thing, though. Like, if you ask the coaching staff or some of the players, like, guys will say, like, hey, it's also on me. But you're also seeing some of the sameness from maybe a little bit of what New York was doing to Cleveland. Like, Max Strus is a guy who is getting a lot of second chance opportunities. Like, he is kind of being a little bit annoying, like, not as talented as Josh Hart is at doing it, but like as annoying as Josh Hart was in that series of just grabbing the second chance opportunities and giving it to like Jalen Brunson or somebody else to kind of set up an offense again. But like Strus is doing a lot of that for the Cavs, and I think LeVert is taking advantage of it. I think Mitchell, just using his pure and raw athleticism, is doing it too. But that could still be an issue. But I think for the Cavs, they might be a little comfortable with it because they have more shooters on the perimeter, and they have guys that are confident in their shots. And I know Knicks fans saw me saying in jest to a friend who was like talking about Jalen Brunson's numbers in last year's series. But I do think that if Isaac Okoro doesn't sit for a month before the postseason because he hits that game-winning shot against the Nets, it's like he's flying high. He's really confident in all of his abilities, and just like defensively is smothering. And then he comes back, essentially just comes right back to basketball in the playoffs, and like is completely a shell of himself. Like, is playing well defensively, but is a non-factor offensively. Like, he has that confidence. I think he can give you a little bit of juice off the bench, and also he can handle the responsibilities of defending a Jalen Brunson, which, you know, is no easy task, but at least makes life a lot easier for everybody else on the Cavs too. But I would still say, just because, like you said, they've played each other twice this season. It was Halloween and November 1st. That's so far ago at this point. Like, it's hard to really gauge on how a series would go just based off those two games. I would call it chalk if they met in the first round or even in the second round. And at this point, to me, it's just who is the healthier team when they meet? Because like the Knicks have their own health issues that they're working through right now. I think the Cavs still are too when it comes to Mobley and Garland. And, you know, knock on wood, nothing happens, but injuries do pop up no matter what. And that's always the case when it comes to the playoffs. But between these two teams, like, they're so evenly matched in certain ways. And like the Cavs have more depth this time around that it could be a bit more of a competitive series. It comes down to health and then obviously ultimately coaching. And like, yeah, Tom Thibodeau is much more experienced, but he does have his limitations and warts. I think JV Bickerstaff is a little inexperienced, but has a lot of warts when it comes to some of the stuff he does in the playoffs. But we'll see how it goes. I think I would just call it chalk if these two collected or matched against each other, and it would just be like, all right, the healthiest team will win this series. It could go 4, 5, 6, or 7. Like, it's just one of those matchups, you know?
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing from a Knicks perspective is just trying to stay out of Boston's side of the bracket, and I think that's what everyone's trying to do. Yeah, of course, avoid the Celtics as long as possible. Right. And if you're lucky, the Bucks and the Celtics just beat the heck out of each other in the second round, and then one of those teams is a lot more haggard if you run into them in the conference finals. Yeah, and I would imagine like Cleveland. I mean, despite the fact that it sounds like they've done a pretty decent job against Milwaukee this year, would probably prefer the Knicks just to avoid playing Giannis for as long as you possibly can. And I think the Knicks, just coming off that first round series last year, would certainly prefer the Cavs in the second round. And there's a world where we're talking about one of these two teams in the conference finals in a couple of months. I promise to keep it brief on this, and we'll close out in 2 minutes. But Donovan Mitchell watch, I feel so weird every time I feel borderline predatory, Evan. Anytime you and Chris come on and ask, it's like asking about someone's girlfriend. Like, hey, you guys still doing well? Like, what's like? Oh, you had a fight? Oh, cool. But Donovan Mitchell, I don't know where he ranks on like the Knicks big board of targets, just because, I mean, similar to Garland and Mitchell, like there are very real questions about like how him and Brunson would fit. Like I argued when they got OG Anunoby, like maybe that opens up the window to make a trade like that more feasible, just because he gives you such a like high floor defensively between that and like whatever rim protector the Knicks have at the center position. Still, I wonder if that is Leon Rose in the Knicks front office's ultimate goal. That being said, if Mitchell had interest, like hard to turn down a player that is that good. How do you think, like after, like, I mean, especially like after a stretch, like where I think maybe more than any other, like he got to put his stamp on Cleveland with Garland and Mobley out. Like, is there any more comfort with the idea that he would want to be in Cleveland long term?
So I'll put it this way. I think after the Knicks went and got OG, they emptied the tank a little bit more asset-wise. I think they have some internal decisions to make. And also, like you said, if Leon Rose's big fish is Joel Embiid, if things go sideways in Philly, understandable. I think he would take the reigning MVP, at least at this point, over Donovan Mitchell. And I love Donovan Mitchell in his game. But internally, if you're the Cavs, Kobe Altman, the president of basketball operations, has been pretty transparent the entire time. Like, Mitchell consulted the Cavs and helped recruit Max Strus and George Niang to join them in Cleveland. Like, he has been an advocate of the moves they're making. He's been heavily involved, and Altman said, like, hey, he's done more than enough to show us that we want to keep him long term. We have to prove to him that it's worthwhile to play his prime here. And sure, he said, like, he as in Mitchell said, he's not going to entertain anything until this upcoming summer, but if I'm Cleveland, just based on how the market is panning out, like, sure, he could say, like, I want to go to New York. And I know the Miamis and the Lakers of the world will always be in the conversation, whether it's media driven or Pat Riley manifesting something that may not be there. But I think the Cavs have a better chance now than maybe they did either at the end of last postseason or the start of this season, just because of, like you said, him leaving his stamp on this team, him being so involved throughout the process of it, and also the fact that, like, the market just may not be there for what he's looking for, because Donovan made it clear, like, yeah, he'll do what's best for him personally, but he also wants to do even better for him professionally. Like, the most human moment I've ever seen an NBA player have is when New York ended Cleveland's season in 5 games. Donovan came to the podium, spoke for 20, 30 minutes, and then said, all right, guys, well, I'll see you next year. And, like, kind of like let out like a heavy sigh. You could tell he was just upset beside himself. Yeah. And then he was walking away and he went back to the podium and said, he's like, I'm sick and tired of saying that. He's like, I'm sick and tired of losing in the first and second round. I want to go to the conference finals. I want to play for greatness. And I think, that was a human moment, but also like a very transparent, like, shout to the Cavs front office saying, like, yo, let's make some moves to get it done. And I think the question is center will be a thing for Cleveland too when it comes to Mobley and Allen, but I think they have a better chance now of keeping him. I don't want to say like it's a maximum long-term deal. Maybe it's a shorter deal with an option so Mitchell can, remain fluid in his options, but, just retest the market later. And it gives the Cavs a little bit more breathing room. But the Cavs have been making it very clear that Donovan Mitchell is the best player on this team, and this is his team, and they're trying to do everything they can to keep him. And they've done stuff to, like, bringing one of his best friends, like George Niang, in. They're very active in trying to get Royce O'Neal before Phoenix stepped in, which is another close friend of his from Utah. So we'll see what happens. Things can change, like the seasons, and it's like a gust of wind, like it can blow in any which direction. But for now, like, as we record this, even after a 2-game slide that the Cavs are currently on, like, I feel good about their chances of keeping Mitchell this summer. It may not be on like a super long-term deal, and maybe they drag this out till next year when he becomes an unrestricted free agent and he really negotiates for top money. But we'll see how the conversations go this summer when he actually says he'll entertain anything of an extension from the Cavs.
All right, that'll do it. He's Evan Dammarell. I'm Gavin Schall. This has been Locked On Cavs and Locked On Knicks. We'll talk to you very, very soon, hopefully together for an upcoming fight matchup. But until then, have a good week, and we'll see you soon. Locked On Knicks, Locked On Cavs.